Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, January the 5th, 2022. I've been thinking about the old labor song, Which Side Are You On? Which was written in 1931 by a woman to advocate for the United Mine Workers in Harlan County, Kentucky. These are days of binary division, no question. And coexist, well, you see that on a lot of bumper stickers, but I don't think that our enemies actually believe in coexistence. Quite the opposite. Benjamin Braddock writes in American Greatness, the ridiculous fantasy of a national divorce. The solution is not some sort of secession or civil war. The solution is for the right to stop being rank amateurs when it comes to politics and governance. He begins, every now and then an absurd idea enters the discourse and picks up a sort of mimetic traction in spite of itself. The latest such idea is that of a national divorce in which Blue America and Red America decide they've had enough of each other and call it quits. It popped up most recently when U.S. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene broached the idea on Twitter, but the idea has been entertained by liberal figures as well, most recently the comedian Sarah Silverman. The impetus for this proposal from conservatives and liberals alike is the recognition that division in the United States has gone beyond disagreement and good-natured rivalry to outright hatred. Indeed, far from being united by crisis, as America was at crucial points in the past, America is now at the point of schadenfreude, liberals reveling in suffering and disaster when it happens to conservatives and vice versa. The American population has always been divided. That is not a particularly new phenomenon, nor is it unique to America, but in the divisions of the past, even the bloody ones, America found a way to move forward together. As deep as the cultural differences between different sections of the country were, America was still running on the same basic cultural and political operating system inherited from the European Christian founding. That is not the case now. The American population is not just divided. These divisions form subcultures that are entirely alien to one another. 20 years ago, when challenged by a national crisis in the aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, Americans came together in great unity, which was promptly used by America's own political class to their own cynical ends. Now, once again challenged by a national crisis, the American people are setting themselves against each other, and the political class is using this too to its own cynical ends. Instead of taking responsibility for the failure of his administration to prepare for successive waves of the virus, along with the failure of the vaccines to mitigate the spread of COVID on a population level, Joe Biden chose to blame vaccine refuseniks for the pandemic, brushing aside any legitimate objections or the understandable mistrust that large swaths of America have for the medical industrial complex. Biden was supposed to be all about compassion, empathy, and understanding. It is understandable that Americans would be suspicious of the same pharmaceutical companies that ravaged the heartland with opioids and other poisonous drugs, and wary of the same government that refuses to hold those companies accountable. Their general mistrust of a medical system that has failed them for decades and inflicted deep psychological wounds ought to make sense to intelligent people. A little grace would be in order, but it is nowhere to be found. Instead, we have an old tyrant ranting on television, blaming these skeptics and demanding they bend the knee or suffer the consequences of financial ruin. It's no wonder that such behavior would drive people to the extraordinary conclusion that the union must be dissolved. Benjamin Braddock continues, it's not just Biden either. We are in a cold war pitting all against the other. The corporate media could barely contain its glee at the seasonal COVID surge that washed over the South this past summer, a tone that has shifted as the winter wave has washed over the North. When comedian and podcast host Joe Rogan contracted COVID, they mocked his treatment regimen of the drug, which I cannot mention, monoclonal antibodies, NAD, and steroids. How disappointed they must have been when the treatments worked. This hatred is not just an American phenomenon. When Cardinal Raymond Burke was hospitalized and put on a ventilator, The first sentence in the Associated Press story about it noted that he was a vaccine skeptic. As Burke was fighting for his life on the ventilator, Pope Francis did not offer well wishes or ask for prayer for the cardinal, but instead commented, quote, "Even in the College of Cardinals, there are some anti-vaxxers, and one of them, poor man, is in hospital with the virus, but life is ironic," unquote. It is a world war. The example of sociopathy set by the powerful has trickled down to ordinary people. I have friends, Braddock recounts, who were disinvited by their families from Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings for being unvaccinated, or in some cases fully vaccinated but not boosted. I saw one Twitter post where a woman proudly declared that she has cut off her mother from speaking with her or seeing her grandchildren because she did not send photographic evidence of voting for Joe Biden. I saw another in which a son denied his father the proper funeral and burial he wished, choosing instead to have him quietly cremated without so much as an obituary in the local paper. He threw his father's ashes in the garbage, all because he voted for Donald Trump. In Stalin's Russia, people who denounced their family or friends usually did so for some material benefit or to avoid being imprisoned or executed themselves. Here they do it enthusiastically. But a word of warning is in order. The kind of national divorce conservatives have in mind is the amicable separation that Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin sought when they introduced the term conscious uncoupling to the cultural lexicon. A world in which two parties could break up without losing everything. It's an appealing idea. But when liberals say they're considering a national divorce, they mean they want to take your kids, half your money, plus monthly payments, have you living in a dismal studio apartment furnished solely with an air mattress and a microwave, all while continuing to nag you relentlessly and blame you for their problems. Braddock continues, liberalism is fundamentally an ideology of regime change. Those on the left are never satisfied with dominating the areas they already have. In fact, they grow quickly bored with governing them, as can be seen in cities such as San Francisco and Seattle. They are always looking beyond the limits of the city to the wide and wild frontier. This is their doctrine of manifest predestination, that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards a pride flag and BLM sign in front of every house in West Virginia. The moment that a conservative breakaway nation achieved independence and success, there would be plans already underway for color revolutions and occupation by gender-diverse commissars. They will never leave us alone, and they will never let us go. Why would they? Just as Pharaoh resisted the emigration of the Israelites, so would liberals and progressives resist their best milk cows, leaving for greener pastures. Conservatives are too valuable to let go. It is our labor that keeps this whole system going. At the moment, at least, we have no Moses, no burning bush, no plague of frogs and blood and pestilence. And most important, we are already living in the promised land. We are not strangers in a strange land, as were the Israelites. This is the land of my parents and my grandparents and great-grandparents, Braddock declares. If anyone is going to leave, it's going to be the carpetbaggers. I was born here, and by God's grace, I'm going to die here. Furthermore, as a practical matter, this isn't 1862, with the national military comprised of state militias serving the federal government at the pleasure of their governors, with clearly delineated geographic boundaries of affinity and animosity. At the time of the Civil War, there wasn't much of a standing national army, only 16,000 troops. Lincoln had to call on governors to send him 75,000 volunteers with which to invade the newly independent states in the Deep South. This is what prompted Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas to leave the Union. Today, Braddock argues, the states don't have much in the way of loyal organized militias, while the national military is one of the most powerful fighting forces on earth. And while our national divisions still follow the pattern of geography, the divide isn't between the North and South. It is between urban, inner suburban America and rural, ex-urban America. America is a red country with small, densely populated islands of blue, with a handful of each side living behind enemy lines. We would also do well to remember the consequences of such a gamble. Out of a combined Union and Confederacy population of around 31 million people, there were more than 1.5 million casualties of that terrible war, including some 750,000 deaths. The defeated South was subjected to a brutal program of subjugation and occupation termed Reconstruction. Between that and the war, it took the South over a century to fully recover, and in some ways, it never really did. Braddock continues, no, despite America's weird obsession with monogamy and divorce bleeding into our political thinking, divorce is not an option and neither is civil war. Perhaps we should just see each other people, and stay together for the kids. The solution is not some national divorce or civil war. The solution is for the right to stop being rank amateurs when it comes to politics and governance. Purge the grifters and incompetents, bring back the old sharks, and have them train a new generation in the art of election warfare. And once in power, actually use that power to purge or destroy the institutions responsible for brainwashing so many of our countrymen. The right has to articulate and act on a positive vision for America and break out of this learned helplessness that we find ourselves in as we point and object while the other side steadily achieves its goals. We have to learn from the left in order to defeat it. And Benjamin Braddock concludes, that doesn't mean copying their framing, narrative, or tactics, but understanding their basic will to power and strategy and adapting our approach to effectively combat it. America lost Vietnam in large part due to its failure to appreciate the Maoist doctrine of political warfare. We were not fighting the same war the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese were fighting. We see echoes of that playbook again, but this time in our own country. We could survive losing Vietnam. We cannot survive losing America. No surrender, no retreat, no compromise. This ends in complete victory for them or us. The sooner that the entire right wing of American politics realizes that, the better the odds are that the victory will be ours. Yes, and to sum up, which side are you on? Let's have a look at the chat. Little Palcaso 88, Dan, Anrun, Don from Beyond, William Hicks, Dan Allison. Don from Beyond says, why do people line up in their hundreds to get a free COVID test? They must gain some advantage from testing positive, perhaps paid time off from work. Well, again, I would mention the theory of René Girard, which is, mimetic theory. Everyone else is doing it. Now, of course, that's the sort of thing that children, including myself, used to say to their parents. Why did you do that bad thing? Well, everyone else was doing it. And of course, the response would come back, well, if everyone else decided to jump over a cliff, would you do that too? And of course, my response always was no. Whereas at the same time, I was thinking, I don't know, what if they put mattresses at the bottom of the cliff? Or what if there were people down there to catch me? People want to be like other people. Hello to SB Aquacha Lango, who gives a shout out to Floridians. Anwin says, I saw a headline today that the Supreme Court had already ruled that state vax mandates are okay. I assume this is a media lie. Can anyone confirm this? That's not my understanding. The Supreme Court ruled that the First Amendment didn't apply in the state of California when Governor Newsom decided to ban church services. And of course, leading the way was traditional Catholic John Roberts. You know, they all go to the same schools and they all learn the same things. Hello to Dr. Deadname. Chogokin 666 reports 1 week later and my ceiling is still leaking. Quechalango says, anyone else see lately KMG seems to be coming in hot with opening? William Hicks says, I thought Biden said he was about fairness and dignity right after he blackmailed workers with their jobs. Hello to Don Willis. Anwin says, Kevin, when will they stop? No, never. Never. I mean, you heard of the slippery slope argument? Oh, yeah, the fallacy of the slippery slope. Well, for pretty much the entirety of my life, it has not been a fallacy. Everything that the slippery slope people have said would come true has come true. You know, let's look at homosexuality. Oh, let's make it legal. These poor fellows just want to go to their bars and not be harassed. Okay, let's do that. And then demands for all manner of things. How about homosexual adoption? Well, that would have been certainly absurd back in 1968 in my country, but then we got that. How about civic unions for homosexuals? So you have all the legal rights of married couples. Okay, well, we'll give them that. And then they demand marriage. Now, of course, that's an absurdity because marriage is the union of a man and a woman or women. No, but we gave them that. And mandatory homosexual propaganda in schools starting at kindergarten. And they got that too. And they have their grooming parlors, which are called gay straight alliances. And the so conservative government of Jason Kenney's Alberta, they have no problem with these grooming parlors. Hang on. I am going to talk about Djokovic shortly. But just to give you an idea of just how horrible these people are and how we cannot live with them, this is from Katie Daviscourt at the Post Millennial. A Portland, Maine city council member who owns a small coffee shop called Little Woodford's is selling disturbing political stickers that call Republicans to be aborted. Andrew Zarro, a progressive serving Portland's 4th District, posted photos of the stickers to his coffee shop's Instagram account, which include phrases like abort Republicans, defund God, and thank you for making me a godless hoe. Yeah. The controversial stickers came as a surprise to many, considering the Alphabet People Council members' frequent pro-equality and inclusivity message. No, don't believe it. Don't believe it at all. So I looked at his website, and we go to the Meet Andrew Zarro section. Andrew Zarro lives in Back Cove with his partner, TJ Zarro. Oh, so this is a Pete Buttigieg situation where one of them actually changed his surname to match that of the other. And their 2 dogs, Gene and Albus. He owns Little Woodford's, a coffee shop that successfully operated in Woodford's Cent Corner for almost 3 years, gaining lots of love and recognition locally and nationally. He recently moved the shop to downtown Portland after the rent was increased beyond what a small business could afford during the COVID-19 global pandemic. And here's a picture of him. And he has a sleeve tattoo on one of his arms, of course. Portland is an amazing city, and Andrew is proud to call it home. I would be willing to bet a not inconsiderable sum of money that Andrew Zarro is not from Portland. That is to say, he didn't grow up there. As a member of the Alphabet People community, he believes queer spaces matter in all facets of our community, public and private. Andrew is running for City Council District 4 in hopes to bring Alphabet People voices to the table in our local government. We have not had an openly queer person on the Portland City Council in over a decade. Golly, that's a shame. So after, more than 50 years of kowtowing to the homosexual lobby, they just can't stop letting us know how much they hate us, how much they want us destroyed. And, you know what Kipling wrote, right? If you keep on paying the Dane Geld, you'll never get rid of the Dane. Who else do we have here? I'll talk about Macron, and I'll recycle my joke a little later. Jeffrey Pye says, real-time zombie drug zone within 2 blocks of our biggest police department in Montreal. Hello to Dionysus. William Hicks says, Kevin, have you seen any of the Coronavirus Investigation Committee, Reiner Fulmich and Vivienne Fisher's project videos on Odyssey? No, I haven't. I guess I'll check that out. Let's see, Don. I will talk about yes, the Pure Blood Men later on. I found that on Vox Day's site. Texas Feral Hog agrees that people are mimics. And David Wright says, hear about the current Donner Pass crisis on I-95. Yes, David Pinson seemed to put a picture of it and suggested that America is hardly a first world country anymore. With the government of Virginia telling people not to drive when the temperature goes below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Tom Anderson says, KMG, remember when the new New York City mayor was being hailed on as tough on crime? Indeed, I do. Quachulango says, Dennis Dale has taught me about Portland, Oregon, dystopia. Don Willis says, they are so filled with hate, they have lost the ability to reason or to even hear. Hello to Metal Mike. Yo Mama says the wind chill in my Ohio city is 9 degrees Fahrenheit. Don Willis says motorcycle helmets, seat belts, guns, fireworks, aerosols, grocery bags. Yes, I have to carry around a bag, and it's a cloth bag, and so it's a health hazard. But they banned plastic bags in my city of Victoria, and this was ruled illegal, and then they found some pretext to ban them again, despite the fact that the alternatives to plastic bags are actually more harmful to the environment. I suppose one of the good things about COVID, perhaps the only thing, was that for a period of months there, the plastic bags came back, but now they're gone again. And occasionally I will forget bringing my cloth bag with me, and then I find myself in a fury at the store, like, what am I, paper bag? It rains a fair amount here, and paper bags fall apart very quickly in the rain. Now, interesting, Tucker Carlson, he seems to have left the reservation. He was actually talking about scale in his monologue last night, talking about the explosion in the population of the United States. Immigration is now at the highest level ever recorded in American history. So is the number of foreign-born already living here. Over just the last year, roughly 2 million people from the third world came across America's borders illegally. All of them arrived with the blessing of the White House. It makes you wonder what sort of economy Joe Biden imagines we're going to have going forward. Domestic manufacturing is in steep decline. Automation is replacing many of the low-skilled jobs that still remain. So what are these millions of new people going to be doing for work 20 years from now? They can't all be Nancy Pelosi's housekeepers. Yes. So he mentions Calhoun, and I never would have seen that coming. Tucker Carlson said, crowding is bad for people. It's anti-human. In a famous series of experiments in the late 1940s, a researcher called John Calhoun forced a group of Norway rats to live in highly overcrowded pens, and almost immediately the rats changed. They became aggressive, then they became psychotic. Ultimately, they died. People aren't so different from that. They need room. That's why our ancestors came to America in the first place, because there was room here. You know who still understands this? Rich people understand this. Ask anyone who's been around the world and knows what the options are. Ask, if you left the United States, where would you move? And no one's going to tell you Lagos or Mexico City or even Singapore. If they're being honest, they'll tell you New Zealand or Alpine Switzerland. Those are low density places. They don't have a lot of other people in them. Why do billionaires buy huge boats? Same reason the ocean isn't crowded. There's no one else there. Uncrowded is good. Yellowstone is beautiful because it's empty. You don't have to be rich to understand this. Would you rather, Tucker Carlson asks, wake up in a $30 million condo in the top floor of an office tower or in a log cabin in a pine forest, wood stove glowing as the snow falls? That's a rhetorical question. Obviously, no sane person would choose the condo, and yet we're told the condo is better. That's why it costs more, because the building is bigger. But how exactly does it scale an advantage? How is that appealing? It's not. In fact, its scale is the problem. Massive size is a threat no matter what it is, always. In our bones, we understand this. Anything huge is inherently terrifying to us. Children run from big things. Well, as E.F. Schumacher famously wrote, small is beautiful. But now we worship the GDP, whatever that might be. And so whatever increases the GDP, well, that's something that we all need to do. Don Willis says, they said plastics were destroying the planet. They told me I was murdering Mother Earth when I wanted paper. Then they just forced plastic on me. Now plastic is out, paper in. Sick, twisted, demonic. Microplastics are bad, though, says No Sleep Till Breezewood, PA. Jogokin 666 says, live in the box, Blab. I rewatched Spike Jonze's movie, Her, last night. I think it's a tremendous movie, but I was just struck by this utopia / dystopia aspect of it. There we have Joaquin Phoenix living up on, I don't know, what, the 71st floor of future Los Angeles, and Los Angeles has become like Hong Kong. Of course, Vancouver has become like Hong Kong, and Victoria is becoming like Hong Kong. We're all going to be stacked high up in the air in little boxes, and that is going to make us like Calhoun's rats. As most of you know, I spent a few months last year living in my late father's condo, and you might think that you own property, but it's like living in a communist country or on an Indian reservation. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. You must ask permission to do this, that, or the other. Even permission to move things in or out of the condo. No Sleep says Her was so on point, especially for something made in the last decade. You don't have to be rich to live in the desert, says Texas Feral Hog. And what are we going to talk about now? We are going to talk about a guest post at William Briggs's blog, COVID and the Cathedral. This is a guest post by John A. Public. I suspect that's a nom de plume. He talks about what Briggs calls the expertocracy. How can you disagree with all of the experts? Well, you know, they all go to the same schools and they all learn the same things. Anyone who speaks to friends and family members still in the grip of the official COVID narrative will typically hear a response like the following: you're telling me that there is a conspiracy involving hundreds of thousands of people that manages to keep itself completely secret? All it would take would be one person going to the press to blow the whole thing. This is a common normie response to conspiracy theories of all types. Well, I just want to break in here to mention, I'll mention later on, finally, a member of the regime media in Canada has noticed what Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, said to Julie Snyder about vaccine hesitant people. You know, that they're racist, misogynistic, anti-science. And the question is, how long should they be tolerated? And, all it takes is Trudeau said this on one of the most popular television shows in the province of Quebec, and the Canadian media decided, yeah, if word of this gets out in English Canada, the Liberal Party might lose seats. And since Trudeau literally keeps us alive with government tax money, that would not be a good idea. And Johnny Public speaks of regulatory capture. This is an entirely mainstream idea employed by political scientists, legal scholars, and prominent economists such as George Stigler. In its classic form, it posits the idea that a government regulatory organization can be captured by the economic and business interests of the industry that it purports to regulate. This is usually a function of the revolving door, the phenomenon that lawyers and other experts working within the bureaucracy know that their tenure will be short. So while they are inside government, they are thinking about positioning themselves for a post-government job. They are soft on the industry and to the detriment of the public good. I'm trying to see if I've got this fellow's name, if I'm remembering his name. Yes, Scott Gottlieb. He's an American physician and investor. This is from Wiki, who served as the 23rd Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration from 2017 until April 2019. Now, even Wikipedia mentions that he's a member of the board of directors of drug maker Pfizer. When he appears on CNN, does CNN mention that he is on the board of Pfizer? No, CNN doesn't. Because if people see this, oh, so he has a direct interest, financial interest in the success of Pfizer's vaccines, they might turn out to be a little skeptical of Dr. Gottlieb, and that's why they don't mention it. This fellow Blair Nathan, who follows me on Twitter, I follow him, was commenting on Michael Anton's essay, and he said there's a little bit of the flavor of if only the Tsar knew about this. And I think there's a lot of truth to this. Oh, we're going to get this information to the media or to the government or to whomever, and based on this bombshell, they're going to change what they do. No, they're not. Our pseudo-anonymous writer continues, the second key element has, as far as I know, only come to prominence recently and has exploded in popularity, both in the dissident right and within the COVID resistance. It starts with the observation that a handful of financial service firms, primarily BlackRock and Vanguard, and to a lesser extent State Street and Fidelity, have become incomprehensibly more massive than anyone thought possible and control a meaningful fraction of all of the stocks and bonds issued by global public companies. What are these firms? Unlike Goldman Sachs, the vampire squid of Wall Street, which makes money by creating financial products and making markets in them, these firms are on the buy side. Their job is to say yay or nay to the securities and other financial instruments that Wall Street is trying to sell to Main Street, acting as investment fiduciaries on behalf of ordinary investors. Each started out managing some version of a mutual fund, the pooled investment vehicle in the portfolios of millions of middle-class Americans. In particular, these firms have focused heavily on the index fund, which seeks to replicate broad securities market performance by buying every security in widely published indexes like the Standard & Poor's 500. The securities regulators always assumed these firms were the good guys, providing clear information and monitoring benefits in exchange for relatively low and transparent fees and presenting little risk of manipulation or other misconduct. So it's very interesting that these firms have become the focus of discussions identifying the villains of late capitalism. This seems to be a function of their enormous size. At $9.5 trillion in assets under management, BlackRock's largely passive index-hugging money is incomprehensibly larger than anything Congress had in mind when it passed the Investment Company Act in 1940. Our essayist continues, I have no brief for BlackRock's Larry Fink, and much of what he and his minions moot publicly these days is symptomatic of the rot endemic to America's oligarch class and their professional managerial hangers-on. For the last several years, the current fad in investing has been ESG, environment, social, and governance, which is the application of woke criteria to investing in stocks and bonds. For example, ESG constrained investment programs will steer their investments away from oil and gas and mining and toward unproven green technologies heavily dependent on government handouts. They also embed diversity and inclusion goals that require companies to have larger and larger human resources departments of bureaucrats keeping detailed statistics of what racial and gender minority groups have been advanced within the company. And I talked about this at greater length in a book that I reviewed a few months ago, and it is called The Tyranny of Woke Capital, which I highly recommend. But back to our essayist. These activities are on their face a dead weight cost, producing no benefit in productivity. Why ESG is happening now is an interesting question about which much ink could be spilled. I'm inclined to think that is another form of intra-elite competition in response to elite overproduction, but a closer look would take us far afield. The typical version of the BlackRock Vanguard theory presented in alternative media focuses on monopoly control. Specifically, the idea that these index fund giants own such large fractions of every public company that by virtue of their shareholding, they can direct these companies and make them coordinate their individual actions in ways that would otherwise be impossible. This combined with the observation that almost every critical industry in the developed world is oligarchy, dominated by a handful of extremely large companies. Our essayist takes issue with that, and he makes a reference to the famous metaphor of Mencius Moldbug, the cathedral. I'm not fond of this term because I think cathedrals are beautiful things, whereas Moldbugs, the cathedral, is a hideous thing, which is dedicated to destroying everything that is good and beautiful in life. But he notes that the conspiracy is emergent or distributed. There is no CEO of the cathedral, no Politburo. There is no top-down hierarchy, and nobody is giving orders. The coordination between each node of the cathedral, whether a government bureaucrat or a journalist, is achieved intellectually and culturally by each member believing and saying the same things, attending the same schools, and reading the same newspapers and websites. Therefore, no orders are given, nor are they needed. Second is that the power sought is informal. This is distinct from formal power, which is power that proceeds for well-understood constitutional, legal, and electoral processes. For example, under the U.S. Constitution, there is no formal role given to Harvard University. Unlike the press, universities as such are not mentioned anywhere at all in that document, but it would be difficult to refute the argument that what the leadership of Harvard University thinks is infinitely more important to the course of recent American history than the opinions of Republican members of Congress and the voters who put them there. My comment on that is that I'm tempted to conclude from time to time that memos are actually sent out to members of the media saying this is the line, or this is a slightly different version of the line, or we have pivoted and this is what you should all say. But of course, I've worked in the media myself, and I used to write a column or several columns, and something happens in the world and all the columnists talk about it, and essentially, with few exceptions, they all say the same things. If they're supposedly on the left, they say the same things. If they're supposedly on the right, they say the same things. This is how one becomes successful as a columnist, by not thinking before one writes. This is quite a long essay. I'll leave it at that. But again, I recommend it. It's on William Briggs's website, wmbriggs.com, published January 5th by John A. Public. Now, yes. This is from Hannah Nightingale at the Post-Millennial. On Monday, Manhattan's new district attorney issued a memo for staff outlining his day one policies and new guidelines for prosecuting crimes, which includes downgrading felony charges and shortening prison sentences. New Mayor Eric Adams has promised to be tough on crime. I've dedicated my career to the inextricably linked goals of safety and fairness, Bragg said in his missive. This memo sets out charging, plea, bail, and sentencing policies that will advance both goals. Data and my personal experiences show that reserving incarceration for matters involving significant harm will make us safer. District Attorney Alvin Bragg said in his memo that his office, quote, will not seek a carceral sentence, unquote, in many cases, with exceptions made for cases including homicides, domestic violence, felonies, public corruption, and some sex crimes. Assistant district attorneys must also consider the impacts of incarceration on public safety, communities, the racial disparity of incarceration, and the financial cost of incarceration. The memo states that armed robbers armed with a gun or other deadly weapon that sticks up businesses will be prosecuted only for petty larceny, which is a misdemeanor, as long as no victims were seriously injured and there's no genuine risk of physical harm to anyone, according to the New York Post. He's pretty much legalized drug buying and selling in that city. Now, these policies have been tried in other places, most notably San Francisco. And how's that worked out? But David Pinson noticed something, actually read the memo. And yes, racial justice is coming to Manhattan. And you know what that means? He said, exception for great white defendants, apparently. This rule may be accepted only in extraordinary circumstances based on a holistic analysis of the facts. Criminal history, victims' input, particularly in cases of violence or trauma. Oh, yes, the racially disparate use of incarceration and education created as a consequence on a period of incarceration. Yes, white man bad. That's essentially what the new policy is in New York. Ted Cruz has pretty much made it official that he is running for president. And I guess he's the never Trump candidate. This is from Tim Haynes at Real Clear Politics. Senator Cruz commented on the January 6th Capitol riot Wednesday during a hearing with the head of the Capitol Police. We are approaching a solemn anniversary this week. Ooh, solemn. And it is an anniversary of a violent terrorist attack on the Capitol. It is also worth asking, what could have prevented the breach of the Capitol? I don't know, like not opening the doors? What could have prevented the riot getting as far as it did? How about not opening the doors? Yes, a solemn moment. Tomorrow is going to be pretty amusing. Maybe it will become like Canada's, what is it, December the 15th? There was a mass killing at a polytechnic, or maybe it's December the 13th. I don't pay attention to it. Back in the 90s, there was a mass killing of women at a polytechnic in Montreal. And so once a year in December, all Canadian men are supposed to hang their heads and make fatuous noises about ending violence against women. And oh, I just feel so guilty because some half Arab crazy decided to kill women decades ago. As I say, maybe this is coming to America. Metal Mike says, really? Cruz said that? He's discredited. No one will vote for him. Quachulango agrees. Texas Feral Hog says, well, I was wondering if all professional servants of the establishment are paid not to think. Well, you know, there is a class of news story. You also see this reflected in columns that they call in England the YOY story. And it often happens, or it used to happen to me, that I'd be assigned some YOY story, you know, as in why is this happening? And then I would investigate and find out that the story didn't hold up. Of course, so much of what you read in the news or you see in columns are of YOY stories that in fact don't hold up. But after investing a certain amount of time, journalists decide, no, I'm not throwing this story away and starting again. William Hicks says, I actually met a man who was shot in the head and survived. Two men broke into his Detroit store circa 1980s, took him out back, shot him at point blank range, left for dead. Mr. Abraham. You know, Journalists, I've mentioned this before, journalists suffer from something I call reporter's disease. That is to say that everyone cares as much as the news, as they call it, as they do, and especially about politics. And I've been reading all these stories about, whither Afghanistan? Oh, and what is Canada going to do about Afghanistan? I don't give a toss about Afghanistan. And I suspect that, I don't know, fewer than 1 in 10 Canadians gives a toss about Afghanistan. But if one reads again and again, whither Afghanistan, I suppose I should have an opinion on Afghanistan. And of course, the planted axiom in all of these pieces is that we actually have the power to affect outcomes in Afghanistan, and we do not. Canada spent something like a decade fighting in Afghanistan, and to what end? Anwin says, speaking of white defendants, anyone familiar with the just started Chandler Halderson trial? A 23-year-old white male killed his parents and chopped them up. He looks very, very guilty. Need someone to do some live commentary tomorrow. Who else do we have here? Is Ted Cruz going to sob bitterly into his pillow at midnight tonight? I wouldn't put it past him. Hello to Half Galician. And let's talk about Emmanuel Macron, the effeminate Robespierre in a business suit who married his mother and is president of France. The French seem to have decided that they want an electoral system which is much like Mexico's, that someone that no one has ever heard of is nominated, and then the elite says, yes, this person is just wonderful. It is going to solve all of our country's problems. So, of course, you'd have to vote for this person. This is from the Daily Mail, David Aver. Emmanuel Macron says he wants to piss off the unvaccinated in foul-mouthed rant, vowing to ban them from public places, including restaurants, cinemas, and coffee shops from next week. Now, this story has evolved because, annoy. Macron said that he wants to annoy the unvaccinated. Then that went to piss off. And I discovered from a video by Paul Joseph Watson that what Macron says was émerger, meaning, sorry for the profanity, literally to cover them in shit. That is what Macron said about 20% of the French people. I guess Macron is following Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden, that the unvaccinated are Untermenschen, and they must be shown no quarter. So we're going to do it. The end, he says. That's our strategy. Vaccine mandates have not worked anywhere in the world. They only serve, it seems to make people who are prone to hysteria become even more hysterical, viz. Australia and New Zealand. But the good news is that what Macron said was assailed from both sides, all sides of the political aisle in France. And it looks like he's not going to get that law that he wanted. And hopefully this means that he'll finish third in the first round of the presidential election in 4 years' time. And what's the latest from Scotland? Again, from Paul Joseph Watson. One of Scotland's largest newspapers is asking its readers if the country should follow Australia's example by introducing, quote, COVID internment camps, unquote. Yes, really, the question was posed via the Daily Record's official Facebook page. Concentration camps, everything old is new again, as the song goes, right? And, okay, so this story moved quickly. Again, from Summit News, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has threatened to deport tennis champion Novak Djokovic if his proof of vaccine exemption is, quote, insufficient. Djokovic was one of 26 applicants who successfully applied for a vaccine exemption to enter the country in order to defend his Australian Open title, which he has won 9 times previously. The world number one has repeatedly refused to reveal if he's jabbed and decried the medical apartheid that's being imposed within vaccine passports. Well, he's already had the disease, so he has, natural immunity. But of course, it's a conspiracy theory or Nazi-esque in some way to suggest that natural immunity has any efficacy, let alone more efficacy than artificial efficacy. A woman called Karen Sweeney, who is, a journo, of course, court reporter at AAP Newswire in Melbourne. And she tweeted, Novak Djokovic is about to find out what it's like to be despised by all of Australia. We're all nice and laid back until we're not. Hashtag get vaccinated. Ooh, tough guy. I responded to her, quoting Clive James, the problem with Australians is not that so many of them are descended from convicts, but that so many are descended from prison officers. And so what's up? This is from sportbible.com, and Josh Lawless. Novak Djokovic has visa canceled, told to leave Australia today. And yes, rules are rules, says Scott Morrison, especially when it comes to our borders. No one is above these rules. Our strong border policies have been critical to Australia having one of the lowest death rates in the world from COVID. We are continuing to be vigilant. I suppose Australia, being an island at the bottom of the world, has nothing to do with that. It has not certainly stopped massive hysteria, panic, and of course they have concentration camps for people who have been exposed. You don't even have to have COVID. If you've been exposed, you can be sent to a concentration camp, or what do they call it? Something like a regeneration center, something like that. According to Paul Sakal, his lawyers are in the process of appealing. There's an increasing possibility that Djokovic will be on the next flight home. Both the Serbian embassy and the Australian ambassador to Serbia are now becoming involved. A lonely-looking Australian Open courtesy car still waiting for him outside airport. Oliver Brown tweeted, as Novak Djokovic's detention at Melbourne Airport extends beyond 6 hours, and that tweet is about 6 hours old now. His father, Serdan, tells media, they are holding my son captive. If they don't release him in the next half an hour, we will fight them on the street. According to the country's health minister, Greg Hunt, the 34-year-old did not provide appropriate standards of proof to enter Australia. I don't know. Maybe they don't like him in Australia because he's so good at what he does. And, okay. And in Germany, Luke Rudkowski tweeted, this is the future your overlords want for your grandmother walking her dog. So there's an old woman wearing a beret, walking her dog, and she's in front of a shop for Damen und Herren. And we see 2 Polizei. And, there's 3. We're up to 3 Polizei. And more come to deal with an old lady walking her dog. And the best part of the video is when a ponytail Nazi, a female Polizei, makes this gesture facing the camera that's filming her. Yeah, you think you're intimidating us? Yeah, the sanitary dictatorship. And in Ontario, which is not quite as crazy as Quebec, Let's have the latest numbers from Chris Herholt, and we should be grateful, as Alex Berenson points out, that the Ontario government actually makes these numbers available. And once you've seen the numbers, all this talk about a epidemic or pandemic of the unvaccinated, well, you can't say that anymore. Ontario reported 14 new COVID-19 deaths Wednesday as the number of people in hospital with COVID-19 jumped by 62% in a single day. Of course, the question is, why are these people in the hospital? Why were they admitted? Because Dr. Kieran Moore, the chief health officer in Ontario, said last week, look, if someone comes to the hospital for a broken leg and then tests positive for COVID, we're not going to count that anymore. People go to ICU for all sorts of reasons. People have heart attacks, strokes, they fall down the stairs, whatever. Since January 1st, access to free PCR testing in Ontario has been restricted to those seeking admission to hospital healthcare, long-term care, and congregate care staff. Their residents, Indigenous people, and select individuals working in high-risk sectors of the economy, along with people identified in the course of outbreak investigations. Of those who tested positive, 387 had unknown vaccination status, 386 were partially vaccinated, 1,554 were unvaccinated, and 9,255 were fully vaccinated. So, what does that tell you about the efficacy? So, a prize goes to John Ivison of the National Post for being the very first member of Canada's regime media to have not only to have noticed, but decided to mention the extraordinary things that Justin Trudeau said about the unvaccinated, that they are racist, misogynist, anti-science, and then going on to question whether they should be tolerated. Ivison writes, the sight of a man in his 50s flashing his Haida Raven tattoo as he received his booster shot was a timely reminder that Tuesday was the first day that over 55s could get the shot in Quebec. Justin Trudeau, for it was he held an early morning photo op that passed without incident. He encouraged others to get the booster without further politicizing the vaccination process. His blandishment to finish the job was much milder in nature than the comments he made in an appearance on a TV show with host Julie Snyder during the fall election that has come to the fore again in the English media this week. Really? It has? No, it hasn't. You're the first, Mr. Ivison. During the mid-September interview, Trudeau said anti-vaccine protesters did not believe in science and were often misogynistic and racist. They are a small group that occupy a loud space, and a decision needs to be made. Do we tolerate these people? Homosexuals, alphabet people are a small group that occupy a loud space, but we're all supposed to, brush away a tear as we applaud their fearlessness or fierceness, I suppose you should say. Yes, and Trudeau said, do we tolerate these people? Ivison says, granted, the comments were made in the middle of an election campaign in which Trudeau's Liberal Party was driving a wedge that portrayed his political opponents as vaccine skeptics, but those are the kind of incendiary words we might normally associate with the bitter political hostilities we see south of the border, where the other side comprises not just opponents but enemies. Speaking of the mimetic theory, I noticed that Andrew Coyne, Canada's leading conservative columnist, is now pulling his hair out. Oh my God, what is Canada going to do? How is Canada going to react if the United States falls apart? Yeah, no one would notice or care what Canada did. Is Canada going to say, we're going to stop trading with the United States because we don't like who the president is? I suppose Canada could do that, but the country would seize up and die within about a week. And again, from the post-millennial, this time from Roberto Wakewell Cruz, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told Canadians it's never too late to get vaccinated, adding that frontline health workers would be much happier to vaccinate than incubate. You know the implied threat there? If you don't get vaxxed, they're going to shove something down your throat, and it would be a pity if it tore up your lungs. The Prime Minister praised the Canadians who stepped up and did the right thing by getting vaccinated and scolded those who did not. It's not just about governments and health workers frustrated that there are Canadians who still choose to not get vaccinated. It's fellow Canadians as well. When people see that we're in lockdowns because of the risk posed to all of us by unvaccinated people, people get angry. Yeah, that's not why there are lockdowns, because it's been proved again and again and then again that they don't work. Trudeau continued, that frontline health worker who's giving you your first dose of the vaccine will be immensely pleased to be able to give you that first dose of vaccine even today. Such gracious people. But they'd much rather be giving you an injection than intubating you in an ICU. Yes, I believe that's called carrot and stick. I should have mentioned this earlier. Toronto terminates 461 city employees who failed to comply with COVID-19 vaccine policy. It's funny, none of them were terminated when it was decided that they didn't have to come into the office. They could supposedly work from home. And again, from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News, in what will surely be a massive step in reducing the spread of COVID-19, authorities in Quebec will ban the unvaccinated from being able to purchase marijuana or hard liquor. The Journal de Montréal reports on plans being prepared by Quebec Premier François Legault's administration, which will most likely see proof of vaccination demanded at the cash register. Legault referenced a certain anger towards unvaccinated people in justifying the new rules, which will only apply to shoppers but not employees who don't have to be vaccinated. The measures are being introduced despite Quebec's high rate of vaccination, which stands at around 85%, but didn't stop the province reporting an average of about 15,000 new COVID infections daily over the past week. Yes, everyone was bashing Jason Kenney in Alberta because he was his ignorance and anti-science that led to Alberta's per capita numbers. But now that Quebec is zoomed to the top of the league tables, no, let's not talk about that. And as always, like to check in with the panic meter. And this fellow is called Bruce Arthur with the Toronto Star, which is the panickiest of all Canadian media. Mostly because it is staffed by bossy hysterics, but I guess I repeat myself. Oh, Aaron O'Toole made some sort of comment about that former CBC employee's essay, and people are upset about this. Feds are pushing. Oh, okay. It's just. Let's see. Ryanair tweeted congratulating Australia for banning Djokovic from its country. Joker Noel, they call him. Very amusing. Very amusing. Okay. Yeah. I just. Oh no, children. Won't someone please think about the children? Oh, just a who's a malignant individual? Oh, I guess this would be Anthony Fury of the Toronto Sun, who said the Canadians are right to increasingly ask why healthcare admins execs paid around $500,000 are still befuddled by the same capacity issues they've now had almost 2 years to prepare for. And apparently it's not the done thing to ask people why they aren't doing their jobs. And as I say, Arthur calls Anthony Fury a malignant individual. You see, occasionally you will find someone who stands outside the mimetic consensus, and especially in my country, that makes one a malignant individual. Again, the medicalization, right? The medicalization. And guess you know what time it is? It's time to shift the goalposts once again because of this whole efficacy problem. This is from Jeannie Bauman at Bloomberg Law. Federal health leaders are moving away from an emphasis on what constitutes being fully vaccinated against COVID-19 in favor of staying current with shots. Quote, we're using the terminology now, keeping your vaccinations up to date, rather than what fully vaccinated means, White House Chief Medical Advisor Anthony Fauci said during a National Institutes of Health lecture Tuesday. Right now, optimal protection is with a third shot of an mRNA or a second shot of a J&J. So we know what this means. Are you fully vaccinated? And people who got the 2 jabs say, well, yeah, I am. No, you're not. Oh, I have to have another. And then they'll be told that they need another and another and another, or else they can't do things. And we're hearing the same thing from England. Boris Johnson said to travel to some countries, you need a booster to be considered fully vaccinated. It is likely within weeks this will become the norm. Jamie Jenkins commented on Twitter, he is quite clearly about to remove the COVID pass from millions who are double vaccinated if they do not get the booster. And, let's hear from a bioethicist. I remember Thomas Fleming, the erstwhile editor of Chronicles, saying to me how much he hated this term bioethics. There's no such thing as bioethics, just ethics. One of the premier bioethicists in the world is NYU professor of bioethics, Arthur Caplan, who is evil. That's the best word to describe him. This is from Hannah Blow at Breitbart. On CNN Wednesday, Kaplan said it is time to shame and blame unvaccinated Americans, adding that society should penalize them in a variety of ways. Quote, by and large, if you're vaccinated and boosted, even if you get infected, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine here. It's the unvaccinated who are going to be hurt. So why should anyone who is boosted bother at this point to do anything that makes the unvaccinated more safe? CNN's John Berman asked. I want us to act as a community. I want us to act as a team. We're fighting a war. Yeah, take that, COVID. And need all hands on deck. More military metaphors. I don't want to reject those who still haven't done the right thing. I'll condemn them. I'll shame them. I'll blame them. But I don't want to exclude them, Kaplan replied, before detailing his desire to penalize them. We can penalize them more. We can say you will have to pay more in your hospital bill. You can't get life insurance or disability insurance at affordable rates if you aren't vaccinated. Those companies should not treat us as equals in terms of what the financial burdens are that disease imposes. Dr. Kaplan. Now do AIDS. How about that? This is John Berman, who's supposedly a reporter. He doesn't sound like one. Yes, Kane at Citizen Free Press points out that a year ago we were told that the idea that the vaccinated can spread COVID is a hoax. A year ago, we were told that the vaccinated are susceptible to new variants and reinfection was a hoax. A year ago, we were told there would be a third and fourth shot. This was a hoax. New shots every year, half a year, hoax. Shots for young children, hoax. Total segregation of the society, hoax. Camps for the unvaccinated, hoax. Unvaccinated, unable to work, hoax. Harder access of medical care for unvaccinated, hoax. Secret contracts between Pfizer and governments, hoax. Well, what a difference a year makes. I was talking about pivoting, and there seems to be pivoting going on in the media for a particular reason, that the good people are getting COVID now. Yeah, the good people. And we can't have that, can we? Salissa of CNN. He tweeted, I've noticed something amid this Omicron surge that's made me reconsider the first 20 months of this pandemic. For months and months, no one I came into contact with admitted they had COVID. Not neighbors, not coworkers, not friends, not acquaintances, not one. Except that with Omicron surging and lots and lots and lots of people I know now getting it, I found that some of the same people telling me they had it last fall or at the start of the pandemic or whatever, which is fascinating to me because it suggests that they were embarrassed or scared to say they or their family had it before. Why? Probably not one reason for everyone, honestly. But I do think societally, we unknowingly turned having COVID into some sort of judgment on your character. The ubiquity, thanks to its contagiousness of Omicron, has changed that dynamic. Some of the stigma of getting COVID has worn off and made people more comfortable acknowledging that they had it before, which is a good thing. We need to recognize that getting COVID isn't a moral failing. It's a super infectious disease that you can protect against, sure, but can't guarantee you won't get it. Anyway, just an observation. Stay safe and stay healthy. And Ace of Spades comments, now it's not a moral failing. Before it was. Before the media was getting it. Before the laptop class, the only group in the world that could really self-isolate enough to avoid dealing with anyone outside their immediate household, started getting it. This pudgy disaster brain imbecile is probably paid over $200,000 a year to work about 2 real hours per day, typing out his insignificant, chicken-headed, stupid thoughts, but will babble about income inequality incoherently, of course. And Ace of Spades points out, unknowingly, well, perhaps you assholes literally turn everything you do into a class marker, which you claim elevates you above the peasantry. You literally do this every day with every single minor consumer purchase. So I suppose at this point it is purely habitual, reflexive, unthinking, and unknowing. See, people from CNN get it. The stigma must end. I don't know. I found this on Vox Day's site. I don't know whether it's a troll or not. If so, it's a delightful troll. And it's from a site called thecovidworld.com. Vaccinated women are now lying about their vax status as more men see them as infertility risk. Everyone was told that those who do not get the jab would regret it, but now it seems that the opposite is true. In a startling reversal, women who have had the COVID vaccine are being shunned in the dating scene by potential partners due to issues with possible birth defects and infertility. Women in New York have started lying about their vaccination status because of the widespread perception among men that they are infertile or will bear children with birth defects. Yes. And apparently, the dating sites are disgusted at this malignant behavior, and they're trying to stop talk about vaccination status. I don't know. One would have thought that that'd be useful information, right? Because aren't the people who are unvaccinated, aren't they horrible, horrible people? And who would want to have sex with a horrible, horrible person? And a fellow called James Patrick Riley at American Greatness writes, since the COVID-19 outbreak and associated lockdowns began in March 2020, for 22 months now, I've made this sad confession. I have no idea what is going on. I understand a nation mobilizing when jihadists fly airplanes into the country's financial nerve center, but I clearly don't understand Zoom classes for children who have statistically zero chance of getting sick, much less dying. What I truly don't understand is just this. Why do they think they can lie to us so shamelessly? What are they really hiding? To begin with, why would any sane Western scientist, theoretically devoted to Western ideals, allow a dangerous virus to be genetically modified in a communist laboratory? In what universe would making a bat virus more transmissible to human beings be considered a good thing? Who could possibly argue that US taxpayers should actually fund such insanity? If you want to understand my I don't know dilemma, it starts here, because my impulse is to respond, wait, you're joking, right? The closest thing I've seen to an answer on this front runs as follows. A lot of very bad actors are developing bioweapons. We need to understand them better than our enemies. We need to develop them so we can learn how to fight them. Okay. But then, see, you lose me when you follow that up with, so we're paying totalitarian communists to do the research. And again, how much, I think there'll be an awful lot of political support for, political party that says this is ending, because we do that sort of nonsense in my country too. And we import communist Chinese to do it in places like Winnipeg. No, we're shutting these places down. In fact, this again, research, we're banning it. And, if people decide to ignore the ban, we will send them to prison for long periods of time. In education news, in Chicago, teachers are close to realizing the long-sought teacher's dream of having 12 months vacation, but still getting paid. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Michael Tracy tweets, the country's third largest school district is officially shuttered due to Omicron. The Chicago Teachers Union votes for indefinite work stoppage. Interesting that this is happening a full year into mass vaccination and billions of dollars poured into schools for COVID readiness. Oh, yes, Sarah for Justice of the Teachers Union. And I talked about this woman some months ago. I should have figured it out. She had some a photo of her on vacation, doctored, heavily doctored. A good job, because I'm looking at this woman and thinking, I wouldn't expect a teachers union official to be as good looking as that. And of course, we learned the truth. Robbie Soav writes at Reason, according to the CDC, 61% of teenagers hospitalized for COVID-19 had obesity. A new study of 915 childhood COVID-19 hospitalizations found that most involved underlying conditions. Of course, we know this, right? But again, we're not supposed to talk about it, because just like AIDS, COVID is a grave threat to everyone. They say that. At the same time, they're saying, oh, so you want to let all the old people die? It's, again, that they're playing the Schrodinger's cat game, that this is true. Well, at the same time, the opposite is true. But the commonality is that both this and that are directed at us. They're directed at us. And let's see. Oh, yes. Let's go to Eugippius at his Substack. American universities have serious optics problem in the arena of diversity, inclusion, and equity, DIE, as it's known. The fact they are far less diverse than their student populations and far, far less diverse than the United States as a whole. This gave rise at points throughout my career to pious diversifying initiatives driven by zealous upper administrators. They would pound the table at meetings and demand that you diversify the faculty. They would approve or deny lines on the basis of whether they were thought likely to diversify the faculty. Things we weren't allowed to do in other contexts, hire spouses, for example, were totally fine as long as they were in the service of diversifying the faculty. He has this to say in another post. I want to convey here more than anything else the complexity and extent of modern Western governments. They're unbelievably elaborate systems, and they are not easily controlled or understood by individuals or confined groups. A lot of the regulations and policies are totally baffling and inexplicable, and this has been the case for decades, long before anyone cared about SARS-related coronaviruses. These systems exhibit properties of spontaneous order. They act towards their own ends in ways nobody intends, even as people within them perceive the folly of what their institutions are doing. They are suprahuman organisms. As for plans and conspiracies, there are two of them which played a huge part in making what should have been a middle-of-the-road pandemic influenza-type event into a worldwide catastrophe. There is, firstly, the decades-long retooling of biodefense planning and preparedness into pandemic planning and preparedness. This happened after 2003 in the wake of the SARS-1 outbreak. Our benevolent public health authorities and their allies in academia suddenly became deeply interested in pandemics, and they acquired a bunch of shiny new policy toys they wanted to try out. The false swine flu panic of 2009 was an early sign that this entire network of think tanks, schemers, and philanthropic organizations had begun to represent a truly dangerous threat to our economies and societies. Then second, there is the specific role of shadowy actors, mostly from mainland China, in promoting mass containment after January 2020. I really recommend you betake yourself to the Event 201 website and watch all of the videos. You will find there a perfect statement of everything Western pandemic planners have spent years fantasizing about. What's missing from the event is lockdowns, border closures, mass testing, contact tracing, and everything else that belongs to mass containment. All of this, which has made the corona pandemic massively worse, was implemented by very deliberate conspiracies in the earliest months of 2020. Together, 1 and 2 have proven to be a toxic mix. Governments are now using the repressive containment policies they got from China to drive their populations into the arms of the vaccinators. In their eagerness for a pandemic, they once again jumped the gun and overreacted to a virus that was only somewhat bad. They were not welcomed as saviors, and not everybody wanted their vaccines. Well, I can tell you what one of the results of this is going to be. It's not just 20% of the population. What about the other 80%, or in some places even higher than that got the 1 jab, then the 2, and then the 3, and now they're being told, no, that's not enough. I would reckon that there's at least 20 to 30% of the population in Western countries who are now going to be active opponents of the regime. For a start, they will never believe a single thing their governments tell them. Not one. Because we have lived through 2 years of this constant shifting of the goalposts. And again, you want to talk about Schrodinger's cat? On the one hand, science is always changing. And on the other hand, the science is settled. Yes, they can actually say these two things at the same time. And again, what is the commonality? Is that they are both directed at people like you. Alex Berenson, whose book I'm going to be reviewing on Friday, posts on his Substack more bad news on COVID vaccines and myocarditis in men under 40, even as more colleges require booster shots for students. A huge new study has found the risk of serious heart problems called myocarditis in men under 40 soars with each dose of a COVID mRNA vaccine and is sharply higher than the risk from a coronavirus infection itself. The findings call into sharp question the efforts by American colleges and universities to make their students receive booster shots before returning to school this January, especially since other studies have shown that the risk of post-vaccine myocarditis is concentrated not merely in men under 40, but in those aged 16 to 25. The study, which British researchers released in late December, showed that the risk of myocarditis almost doubled after the first Pfizer shot in men under 40. Then it doubled again after the second and doubled again after the third to almost 8 times the baseline risk. But then we have people like Stephen Marr telling us, no, I mean, it just never happens. It's so very exceedingly rare. So very exceedingly rare. I don't know, maybe they're just ignorant. They don't seem to spend a lot of time looking for data, looking at data, because, why do they need to look at data? I mean, the experts have decided. But again, we don't hear these people saying only people with, doctorates in political science or whatever should be allowed to vote in elections. But no, you're not allowed to look for yourself with regard to anything medical. At dailyskeptic.org, formerly Lockdown Skeptics, Boris Johnson all but ruled out another lockdown in the House of Commons earlier and held out the prospect of return closer to normality within weeks, hinting at the abandonment of Plan B by February. Government suspends access to confirmatory PCR tests for asymptomatic LFT positives, raising fears of false positives consigning thousands to their homes. And we already talked about Macron. Most Democrats wrongly believe that vaccines provide more protection than natural immunity. COVID testing rules to be relaxed to address staff shortages. Yeah, so that people who can't, the vaccinated, who can't get COVID or can't transmit it, no, we're going to have to, force you to isolate, and which is kind of problematic because we're not going to have enough people to, run hospitals. I've been neglecting him, but we're going to have more from Joseph Tainter's the collapse of complex societies. And he's discussing the various theories of why various societies have collapsed. There are so many factual debates regarding intruder theories that it is necessary to discuss only one: the Dorian invasion of Mycenaean Greece. Quite simply, for a people who sought such devastation, the Dorians have left curiously little archaeological trace. Only two artifacts were introduced at this time: the cut and thrust sword and the violin bow fibula, and both were used by the Mycenaeans, not by invaders. Desborough suggests that perhaps the invaders completed their work and then withdrew, which notion leaves the historic linguistic distribution unexplained. Rhys Carpenter, in his ever delightful prose, characterizes the dilemma well. Quote, "All in all, an extraordinary and paradoxical situation in which there is no sign of the presence of any hostile invader, for whom no route of entry and no passage can be found. Yet the native population is deserting its established habitations as though driven by some invisible and nameless terror, like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing," unquote. Desborough's suggestion of destruction and withdrawal raises a point of uncertainty in regard to the Harappan, Mycenaean, and Mayan collapse. If these areas were so worth invading, why then destroy those things that would repay conquest? This and other ambiguities in the intruder theory tempt one to rename it the poltergeist model. Collapse is called by mysterious troublemakers whose behavior is inexplicable and whose very presence is difficult to show. And conflict, contradictions, mismanagement. Judging by the number of authors whose work falls under this theme, it may be the most popular approach to understanding collapse. There is some variety in the approaches lumped herein: class conflict, Marxian contradictions, and elite misbehavior or mismanagement. But the common underlying theme is antagonism and conflicting goals between social classes. Collapse is thought to result from such conflicts through withdrawal of support and outright revolt by peasant populations and by elite self-serving and political management. There are a variety of both general and area-specific applications of these ideas. Conflict theories date at least to the time of Plato, who believed proper government to be a balance of democracy and despotism, with an excess of either leading to decay, and Aristotle, who suggested that arrogance and self-aggrandizement in office engender factional conflicts, revolutions, and the destruction of regimes. Polybius relied heavily on class conflict in his cyclical theory of political evolution. And I will have more from Joseph Tainter tomorrow. But right now, we're going to talk about something that was denied for decades and decades and decades. Hidden for political reasons, because of our cowardice, or more to the point, the treason of our rulers. This is from Henry Martin in the Daily Mail. Ex-Labor peer, that's to say a lord, Nazir Ahmed, 64, is found guilty of attempting to rape a young girl and sexually assaulting a boy under 11 in the 1970s. Former Labour peer Nazir Ahmed, yes, who's formerly Lord Ahmed of Rotherham, where have we heard that name before, was today found guilty of sexual offenses against a boy and girl dating back more than 40 years. A woman told a jury at Sheffield Crown Court that Ahmed, now 64, had attempted to rape her in the early 1970s when the defendant was about 16 or 17 years old, but she was much younger. The former politician was also found guilty of a serious sexual assault against a boy under 11, also in the early 1970s. The jury was played a recording of a telephone call between the two complainants made by the woman after she went to police in 2016. Tom Little, QC, prosecuting, told the jury that the call was prompted by the man contacting the woman by email saying, "I have evidence against that pedophile." Ahmed denied all the charges but was found guilty Wednesday on 2 counts of attempted rape and 1 of serious sexual assault. The former Labour peer resigned from the House of Lords in November 2020 after reading the contents of a conduct committee report which found he sexually assaulted a vulnerable woman who sought his help. The report made him the first peer to be recommended for expulsion, but he resigned before this could be implemented. Ahmed was charged along with his 2 older brothers, Mohammed Farouk and Mohammed Tariq, but both these men were deemed unfit to stand trial. Farouk and Tariq faced charges of indecent assault in relation to the same boy that Ahmed abused, and also on Wednesday, the jury found that they did the acts alleged. The conviction of Ahmed follows a tortuous prosecution, which included the halting of a previous trial by a judge to bemoan the antiquity of the allegations. So, you've heard of Rotherham. You may not have heard of the many other cities in England which featured Muslim grooming gangs. If you go to the very lengthy Wikipedia entry on Rotherham child sexual exploitation scandal, what you will discover is that despite, after decades of the cover-up by the police, by local officials, by national officials, politicians, and it always seems to be a certain type of a man, generally from Pakistan. But official studies were made, many official studies, and saying Pakistan has nothing to do with these scandals, and Islam has nothing to do with these scandals, despite the pictures that we see again and again and again in the newspapers after they are convicted, because they can just define these things out of existence. During a hearing in September 2014 to discuss Rotherham, the committee chair, Keith Vaz, told South Yorkshire's Chief Constable David Crompton that the committee was shocked by the evidence and that it held South Yorkshire police responsible. Asked about an incident in which a 13-year-old found in a flat with a group of men was arrested for being drunk and disorderly, Crompton said it would be referred to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. In January 2013, the committee summoned the head of Rotherham Council, Martin Kimber, to explain the lack of arrest despite South Yorkshire Police saying it was conducting investigations and the council having identified 58 young girls at risks. Vaz questioned why, after 5 Asian men were jailed in 2010, more was not done. In Lancashire, there were 100 prosecutions the year before last. In South Yorkshire, there were no prosecutions. The council apologized for the systemic failure that let down the victims. And of course, Keith Vaz found himself in some trouble himself. What is this? Male prostitute revelations. Yeah, they don't call it the pedophiles for nothing. Of course, that's a satirical reference from a famous British satirist who was apparently making fun of what was seen to be a hysteria over pedophilia in the United Kingdom. The show was called Brass Eye, and it was up to that time the most controversial TV show that had ever been aired in Britain. It's very, very funny, particularly about the media, but it seems that Chris Morris got pedophilia wrong. Let's see. I'm reading from Wikipedia. The second episode, Drugs, has been described by Professor Michael Glossop of illustrative of the ease in which anti-drug hysteria can be evoked in the United Kingdom. In the opening scene of this episode, a voiceover tells viewers that there are so many drugs on the streets of Britain that not even the dealers know them all. An undercover reporter, played by Morris, asks a purportedly real-life drug dealer in London for various fictitious drugs, including triple sod, yellow benteens, and Clarky cat, leaving the dealer puzzled and increasingly irritated until he asks the reporter to leave him alone. He also explains that possession of drugs without physical contact and the exchange of drugs through a mandrill are perfectly legal in English law. One drug mentioned was a fictitious drug called cake, described as being from Czechoslovakia, despite the country no longer existing when the episode was screened. The drug purportedly affected an area of the brain called Shatner's bassoon, altering the user's perception of time, while also giving them a bloated neck due to massive water retention, a check neck, and was frequently referred to as a made-up drug during this show. Other celebrities, such as Sir Bernard Ingham, Noel Edmonds, and Rolf Harris, were shown holding the bright yellow cake-sized pill as they talked, with Bernard Manning telling viewers a fictitious story about how one girl regurgitated her own pelvis, and recounts that one young kiddie on cake cried all the water out of his body. David Amos, who was murdered by an Islamic extremist a few months ago, the Conservative member of Parliament for Basildon, was fooled into filming an elaborate video warning against the dangers of this drug, and went so far as to ask a question about cake in the UK Parliament along real substances cat and gamma hydroxybutyric acid. In response, the Home Office Minister incorrectly identified the fictitious drug cake as the pseudonym for a hallucinogenic drug, which I cannot possibly pronounce, and it's about 30 letters long. Let's go to the chat. Ethical issue. Hello to Gloria Miller. Trolling a drug dealer does not sound prudent, says Dr. Deadname. No, it was rather frightening to watch. I mean, either this guy was a real, he was either a real drug dealer, or this is one of the greatest acting performances I've ever seen. Clarky cat. That's too funny. Hello to St. Thomas Acquire. We need to help. We have to relax no matter what, because we need to avoid hysteria, says Texas Feral Hog. As these systems become more invasive than they already are, I think the majority of people will start turning, says St. Thomas. Are they stupid or are they evil, says True Greenbird, blah, blah, blah. We don't have time or resources to spend figuring out the mental state of our oppressors. Trade in your Hanlon's razor for an Amalric's hammer. Don Willis says, no, KMG. Fellas, relax. Let's see how many jabs it takes to kill someone. If Winter Olympics really took these shots and not saline, some will die off, maybe live in prime time, says Quacho Lango. True Greenberg says, the science says we have always been at war with East Asia. Ogan's Iron says they lie all the time. Ogan's Iron says, yes, some people are on the injection train, but will want to get off. Well, I think a lot of them, as I said earlier, are going to be angry that they've been sold a bill of goods. You told us 1, and then you told us 2, and then you told us 3. And now you're saying, no. This never ends. It never ends. And because on the one hand, the science is always evolving, but the science is settled. So I want to talk now about, let's talk about Jon Stewart. I used to think that he was occasionally funny. About the time that he grew that beard, then he just became, intolerable. This is from Hannah Nightingale at the Post Millennial. A Jewish charity is defending Harry Potter writer J.K. Rowling after comedian Jon Stewart accused the writer of anti-Semitism in a YouTube video. After the backlash, Stewart went into damage control, changed his YouTube thumbnail, and denied that he made the claim. On his podcast, The Problem with Jon Stewart, Stewart slammed the author for the appearance of the goblins that run Gringotts Bank in the Harry Potter series. Stewart said in the world of Harry Potter, people can ride dragons and someone can own a pet owl, yet he wondered who should run the bank. Jews. It was one of those things when I saw it on screen and I was expecting the crowd to be like, holy shit, in a wizarding world, just throw Jews in there to run the effing underground bank? And everyone was like, wizards. It was so weird. Dave Rich, director of policy at the Jewish charity, the Community Security Trust, told the Daily Mail that Rowling had been very supportive of the Jewish community. Sometimes a goblin is just a goblin, said Rich. Rich did note, however, that there might be something subliminal in Rowling's depiction, suggesting that subconscious anti-Semitism in society over the years may have led to characters like Goblin taking on anti-Semitic caricatures in their appearances. Others came to Rowling's aid as well, with author and literature expert Nicholas Jubber noting that Rowling's depiction of the creatures falls in line with traditions in British fantasy literature. Rowling appears to have followed traditions. The old German word kobold gave us the word cobalt, signaling the association of these creatures with mining for precious ores. So it makes sense that goblins would be linked with vaults and underground storage, Jubber said. Some fans suggested if people had issues with the depiction of goblins in Harry Potter, then they should take issue with other fantasy genre books as well. Quote, goblins were described and depicted like that decades before Rowling, so if those activists have problems with how goblins are depicted, they should cancel fantasy books and mythos that existed before. You would have to tar all fantasy writers, such as Tolkien and artists who have portrayed goblins in exactly the same light since the 19th century. In most fantasy and children's writings, they are almost always portrayed as mean hoarders of gold and jewels with the same features. Look, the paranoia here is off the charts. That someone like Jon Stewart, and he's not the only one, sees something on a movie screen that's ugly and with low morals, and he thinks that's me. That's about me. It's absolutely preposterous, but it demonstrates it's such a self-own, such a self-own. So let's talk about social media and how social media drives women crazy, or crazier, one might say. This has long been my opinion. And I believe I explained why. That in the past, women have always been in competition. Women are fiercely competitive, but in a different way than men. But women would be in competition with their sisters, with their friends, with their schoolmates, with their coworkers, their female coworkers. That was before social media. With social media, women are in competition with every other woman in the world, and it's driven them crazy. This is from Mary Harrington at Unheard, The Importance of an Angry Woman. And there's an illustration here of Katy Perry. And I'm thinking, what has this woman done to herself? She used to be so attractive looking with her black hair and pale skin. Now she's just another bottle blonde. And she has applied bronzer, very dark bronzer, over every part of her body that can be seen. And she's wearing some sort of frock here, which is one of the most, it's fluorescent green, one of the ugliest things that I've ever seen. Because I guess the culture has told Katy Perry that your good looks are causing, other women to be envious. So ugly it up. Harrington begins with a quotation. Do you ever feel so paper thin like a house of cards, one blow from caving in? Katy Perry's Firework was perhaps the ultimate chin up, tits out song for the first generation to be fully net native from childhood onwards, and not just because in the official video Perry shot sparklers from her boobs. Her song struck a chord with many. Firework peaked at number 3 in the UK charts and number 1 in the US. Her prescription for feeling bad is simple: don't feel bad. Instead, all you have to do is own the night like the 4th of July. But how, in practice, is one meant to own the night? I'm going to be talking about the Sparks Brothers documentary by Edgar Wright tomorrow. And one of the women interviewed in it is marveling at the range of topics covered in Ron Mayall's lyrics. And she says that, in effect, today, there's only 2 kinds of songs. I want to have sex with you, although she expresses this a little more earthily, and don't bust our party. Of course, Katy Perry, her and her gal pals busting up a hotel room is supposed to represent female empowerment, and I'm afraid this has always mystified me. Mary Harrington continues, a new book offers some suggestions aimed, it seems, at the adults who were once teenage Katy Perry fans. Why has nobody told me this before? Invites us to see becoming less paper thin as an important form of self-improvement. To me, opines author Dr. Julie Smith, working on maximizing our mental health is no different to working on our physical health. Well, that's not true. If one does a certain set of exercises regularly, one can be assured of the physical changes that will result. One can engage in autosuggestion all one wants, and it's not necessarily going to make one happier or more content. I would have thought that any adult would know that. Back to Harrington. Looking through the problems Smith describes, one can infer a few things about the implied reader and their struggles. This person is anxious, perfectionist, keen to be liked, prone to minutely dissecting social interactions, spends a lot of time scrolling through social media, and worrying about others' perceptions. This suffers low mood and anxiety, struggles with stress, there's a whole chapter on it, and thinks a great deal about couple relationships, another chapter. Typical self-limiting beliefs include imagining that failing at one thing makes them a loser, and that because someone hasn't called in a while, it's because she hates me. I have seen this with women, with younger women. Text gets sent off. Where's the return text? A minute later, where is the return text? And, if there's been no return text in, say, 5 or 10 minutes, I hate her. I hate that bitch. Seriously, I have seen this. Dr. Julie never explicitly addresses her book to one sex or the other, but I'm willing to bet you know more women than men who fit the description above, an egregious bit of stereotyping that is supported by studies which show women consistently score more highly for anxiety, perfectionism, and neuroticism than men. It is tempting to suggest that the type of neuroticism addressed in Dr. Julie's book is new, a product of the navel-gazing social media age, perhaps. And considerable evidence has been amassed now to suggest that social media is making young people more neurotic, especially young women. A few months before Firework reached number 1 in October 2010, Instagram was launched. In the 4 years that followed, as girls sang along to Katy Perry's song about transcending your insecurity to wow the crowd, the rate of hospitalization for self-harm among American girls aged 10 to 14 doubled. Similar trends are visible in the UK. The Guardian reported in 2017 that over the decade 2007 to 2017, the rate of hospitalization for self-harm among girls under 17 had risen by 68%. And Instagram is heavily implicated. Summarizing its effect on self-perception, a 2019 internal presentation by Facebook, Instagram's parent company, reported, quote, "We make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls," unquote. Harrington continues, but delving into historic medical literature on women's mental health suggests that while Instagram may not be helping, it's possible that the platform is exacerbating something that already existed. Feminists have long written critically about sexist portrayals of women's emotionality in medical literature. Over 3 centuries ago, in 1681, The physician Thomas Sydenham offered a description of what he calls the hysteric diseases, which sounds strikingly like the emotional world experienced by Dr. Julie's implied reader. Quote, "They indulge terror, anger, jealousy, distrust, and other hateful passions, and abhor joy and hope and cheerfulness. They love the same persons extravagantly at one time and soon after hate them without cause. So unsettled is their mind that they are never at rest," unquote. Back to Harrington. Unlike Dr. Julie, Sydenham wastes no time in attributing this form of mental stress more to women than men. Few women, he asserts, are quite free from every species of this disorder. But unlike the ancients who thought neurosis was a function of female physiology, Sydenham thought it was mostly an effect of material ease. In his observation, women who do hard physical work don't suffer from hysteria, while men who lead a sedentary life and study hard do. Sydenham called this male version hypochondria rather than hysteria, but describes both ailments as characterized by similar symptoms: lowness, disordered mind, and incurable despair. For Sydenham, this ailment of ease inevitably includes more women than men. For men cultivate the earth, hunt and kill wild beasts for food, and the like. While the wealthier a woman gets, the more likely she'll be exempt from such grueling work. But perhaps material comfort is a double-edged sword, Harrington argues. We might infer from Sydenham's comments that without a healthy channel for aggression and a sense of being to act on the world around us, both sexes grow restive. And a historically sexed division of labor has made this especially the case for women. The accompanying sex role stereotypes, meanwhile, have long since taught women to bury all such dark and dangerous emotions. Far from pursuing agency in a full range of emotional expression for its implicitly female readership, "Has nobody told me this before?" continues the time-honored tradition of teaching women to internalize. Sigmund Freud based his theories of the human psyche on the twin pre-rational drives of sexuality and aggression. But these, considered fundamental human drives by psychoanalytic psychotherapy, barely function in Dr. Julie's manual for self-optimization. 2 mentions each. In contrast, anxiety appears 77 times, and while there's a brief discussion of anger, this is only in the context of grief. Implicitly, anger is never about aggression. It's always a cover for something cuter and more deserving of sympathy, such as fear or loss. I'm reminded that the humorist Fran Lebowitz once wrote, "There are only 2 states, anxiousness and death." But of course, she is a woman. At the micro scale, the book offers uncontroversial and often practical advice on how to be slightly less neurotic. Our minds can play tricks on us, Dr. Julie advises, so troubleshoot practical reasons for feeling low, such as tiredness or thirst, before you catastrophize. Try not to obsess about things that go wrong. Go for a short walk and think about something else. Write down 3 things a day you feel grateful for. Get enough exercise, sleep regularly, and for long enough. Eat real food and not too much of it. Stick to a regular routine. But its overarching message is unnerving. In Dr. Julie's world, there's no question of using kinetic emotions such as anger or aggression to change anything around us. Rather than when experiencing strong emotion, she encourages the reader to use physical movement, to use that physiological arousal in the way it was designed to be used. I doubt Dr. Julie has in mind the physical movement of her reader's fist towards someone else's face, which is arguably how the physiological arouser of anger is designed to be used. But this bait and switch exemplifies the pervasive message of the book, that somehow we're all alone in a world of shadows where authentic encounters with other people are not possible. Nothing we feel can ever be expected to change anything, so it's best we learn to manage it. When experiencing strong feelings of any kind, she advises, the solution is to never act on them, but rather build your awareness of how you respond to various emotions so you can practice stepping back for them and responding to them with compassion. In other words, managing our mental health means not becoming more immediately present in your social world. It means learning to detach from the kind of strong, kinetic, engaged, and embodied feelings you'd need if there were real people out there, and instead detonating excess emotional force in a carefully controlled vacuum. And this should be enough, the book implies, for each individual contains the solutions within them. As Katy Perry puts it, it's always been inside of you, and now it's time to let it through. The chapter on values in quotation marks, makes this clearest of all, for it invites the reader to compile her own ex nihilo, which means out of nothing. Getting clarity on our personal values can guide us on setting goals that will bring meaning and purpose, she declares. A statement that a cynic might observe is on the circular side. Deciding what you understand the meaning of life to be will help you to determine the meaning of life. One might also wonder if it's a little cruel to ask an anxious, neurotic, socially uncertain, and emotionally labile perfectionist to conjure a viable personal philosophy into existence without help from external reference. But leaving that aside, Dr. Julie doesn't acknowledge how the demand that each reader determines her moral system in a vacuum can backfire. For while it holds out a promise of self-containment, it also explains why anger is so curiously absent from this book. For there are forms of righteous anger that aren't covers for fear, loss, or past trauma. This kind of anger is a fundamentally social emotion that expresses outrage at some other or others violating a set of shared principles. But in Dr. Julie's world, there are no shared values, and this means anger can never be righteous and thus can only be detonated safely in isolation and never employed constructively in social encounters. This presents further difficulties too, for losing the shared terrain on which legitimate anger might be expressed doesn't eliminate the underlying human tendency to aggression, even if Dr. Julie doesn't acknowledge that such a tendency exists. And Sydenham cataloged the psychic distress more than 3 centuries ago of people who lacked healthy means of expressing agency and aggression. Those means have shrunk still further today. Harrington continues, this is especially the case for girls, 84% of whom were shown in a recent study to be too sedentary, a higher figure than for boys, just as in Sydenham's day. At the same time, studies show girls are more likely than boys to be both the victims and also the perpetrators of online bullying. No wonder, then, that girls and young women are miserable. We raised a generation with few direct outlets for healthy aggression and the most sedentary lifestyles in history, and told them not to assume any shared values with those around them, which meant they could never be legitimately angry. Then we handed them a set of social media tools for covert interpersonal aggression and watched their mental health implode. Fittingly, Dr. Julie first attained the fame that landed her this publishing deal on Instagram. She has thanked her audience by writing a book which denies the existence of any basic human drives and disavows the social importance of any shared values, while reinforcing every young woman's essential isolation and concurrent duty to self-improve. And Harrington concludes, I'll say this for Dr. Julie's book. It offers some useful tips to the Instagram generation in coping with the main modern delivery mechanism for covert female aggression, Instagram. But it offers nothing to broaden the Instagram view of life, a competitive, value-neutral performance where self-optimization is everything and other people aren't entirely real. Every young woman is a firework, every young woman owns her own night, and no one is coming to help her with it. So let's have a final look at the chat. Enjoying the broadcast from North Carolina, says St. Thomas Acquire. Hello to Emily Norman. And who else do we have here? We are, all right, just scrolling down here. Just have patience with me for a moment. Neil Terry says, I work with mostly women. It's okay. I have my own office on the other side of a large building away from the rest of them. Hello to Susan Strickland. Texas Feral Hog says women have to make sure their young are taken care of all the way to adulthood. They are paranoid. Some other woman will take the bacon guy away. Yeah, that seems to me to be the old cliche. I mean, the joke about, a woman leaving her husband, to find herself, this has been extolled in fiction and in movies for decades now. Oh, the divorce is it's always a positive experience. And if your husband, doesn't think so, then he's a jerk and he deserves what he is going to get. Obviously, one of the advantages of marriage is that, if the man and wife follow the rules, they are both off the market, you know? And it must be a terrible thing for, a woman in her 30s or 40s or 50s, still on the dating scene, going on to Tinder or whatever, having to tart themselves up for a bunch of strangers on the internet. And of course, the obvious question, oh, so you're 37 years old or whatever. You're 45 years old and you've never been married. Yeah, I wonder why that would be. Neil Terry says, focusing too much on internal mental states is so often a cause of anxiety, illness, not a cure. It's the opposite of working out. I've told people this. I've told women this. Just, try to make a habit of not thinking about the things that you don't like, of the things that make you, sad or depressed. Just, and the less you think about them, it's just, after a while, it sort of fade away. And you might find yourself years from now remembering and thinking, wow, did that really happen? That this bad thing happened. So I must, dissect it. And, check it out under an electron microscope over and over again. Texas Feral Hog says, I was miserable working around women in office environments with all of the infighting. In many of the places that I've worked, it seems that there's one woman who decides that she's going to be queen bitch. And she is going to do everything she can to make the lives of all the other women she works with miserable. And, I'll say this for bullying. Bullying is, not all people are willing to bully. And bullying works, because, I've seen it with some of these women that if other women object, oh, you want to get into it? You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. And, other people will just back down. Oscar Toe says, the book Wild by Cheryl Strayed is the epitome of the disgustingness of a woman going off on her own to see what she is missing. Keep on the sunny side, says Don Willis. Quachalango says at high noon, both sides are sunny. Don Willis, accentuate the positive. Quachalango says, keep your daughters off social media. Yes, wise words. Wise words. That's it for today. It's Theater Thursday tomorrow. And as previously mentioned, I will discuss the Sparks Brothers documentary by Edgar Wright, which I've seen 3 times now, which is absolutely delightful. On the book club Friday, I'm going to be talking about Alex Berenson's Pandemia. So I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate it. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, a donation to the live stream may be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.